Welcome to a Q&A with Sonatype maintainers. I am Sal Kimmick. I'm part of the Developer Relations Department at Sonatype. And today we have both Paul and Hervé here to explain a little bit more about what it means to be an open source maintainer. So if the both of you could please give us a quick intro into both yourselves and the projects that you maintain, and then we'll dive right in.
Hervé, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so hello, I am Hervé Boutmi. So I am at Sonatype for 3 years. And in fact, on my free time for now 15 years, I am maintaining Apache Maven. So I started very early with Apache Maven, and it's a nice journey over time.
Absolutely. And Paul, how'd you get started?
Yeah, so Paul Horton, I'm fairly new to Sonatype, but I've been working with Sonatype products for a long while in kind of the DevSecOps space. I've been wanting to get involved with open source for a long time during my career, and really the most sensible opportunity landed after I joined Sonatype. I'm now one of the core maintainers of specifically the Python implementations for CycloneDX, which is one of the leading, if not the leading format for your software bill of materials or SaaS bill of materials and those sorts of things.
Yeah, so both of you had really different journeys and pathways into open source, and I think it's interesting to understand how that might have impacted your approach to open source. So Hervé, why don't we start with really, what have you seen as open source has continued to evolve over the last about 15 years, and how has that impacted the way that you both contribute and maintain your projects?
So in fact, it did not change so much. If you have interest in something is broken, just do it, fix it. So in fact, it was already what I did for my first contrib in 2001. It was about using something, loving it, using my free time on it. Of course, there is a part about work time, because I used it also at work, and there is a part at home, where the interest is sufficient to not only complain, but just do what you can. And it's always the same story for every contributor. You start because you love it, and you start small, and you discover after 6 months that you are not so small anymore. And 2 years after that, you start to be quite big. And of course, when you are 15 years after that and you entered the Apache world and so on, it's just a journey that goes long, but the very beginning and the story is the same. You start because you love it, and it's funny to take time on it.
Yeah, I think that journey of both loving what you're getting involved in and also learning as you're doing it is really important. It's statistically the most likely first contribution anyone will be making to open source is fixing typos. That's not because we're necessarily so interested in fixing typos. It's because your first part of onboarding or becoming interested in a project is reading the documentation, and developers are notorious for having typos and their non-executing documentation, right? So I'm really interested, Paul, what was your interest and journey into getting involved in CycloneDX, and specifically the part that you're contributing to now?
So before I joined Sonatype, you might call me a DevSecOps advocate or leader. I've spent time in consultancies and large financial organizations in the UK, trying to educate them on the sorts of problems essentially Sonatype products aim to help with, right? And the bit that we always are talking about, which is not a Sonatype specific solution, right, is you have to know what you've got. In software, if you've got Log4j, well, great, where is it? CycloneDX is a way to start to codify all that information, which is what we need, right, when we're at scale. So, CycloneDX as a thing, was interesting to me because of that kind of, that kind of aspect. Why the Python stuff? I guess I quite like writing in Python. I wouldn't never have said I was a massive Python developer. I've certainly not been a Python developer as a day job. Let's put it that way. But the opportunity was there. They needed some help. There was interest, and until you get stuck in, it's an opportunity to learn for yourself, right, and improve those other skills.
Exactly. So we've been throwing around a couple of terms here that I want to make sure that we really clarify here. There is a distinction between a contributor and a maintainer, but there's a journey that you typically take as you're going through that process. So if you're contributing to open source, it's pretty easy. Just go find a project that you're really, really interested in, and on GitHub, and go submit your first pull request, right? Go make an alteration, go make a contribution. I've seen people have their first contributions be anything from a typo to an entire tutorial, right? So
you know what?
Yeah.
You know what? When I hear you ask me what changed.
Yeah.
It is now easy.
Okay.
When I started, it was not. But yes, GitHub changed the game. It is now easy. Just do it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so the real difference here being, I guess, that over time, Git technology has made it so that we have version control and the ability to manage merges, right? So that when I get to scaling up and having these projects that potentially, I've contributed to projects that have thousands of contributors to them. And if that's executing code, that is 1,000 opportunities to provide a breaking merge. And so that really has changed the game. And it's also, I think, culturally really changed who has to take responsibility of these, because as a maintainer, for to define maintainer, it's someone who takes responsibility for the maintenance and the executability of a specific package. Now, with the way that GitHub has changed that, it also means that if someone is really inspired by what you've been building and they want to build it out into a new feature or into a new space, potentially you can have a conversation with them about whether or not you, as the maintainer of your package, want to maintain that, or if they want to fork it, develop that and create it into something else, right? Which still potentially could be living on a branch or could be merged back in. But it's really changed the way that we can handle intellectual property and human progress, because for the first time, we can let intellectual property move faster than the rate limitation of individual communication. And that's really why it started to explode in the last 10 years. So do you think GitHub was really kind of the game changer in the way that it went from being, isolated contributors working together to this really distributed process we see now?
In fact, it changed completely. Not to discuss, because we were able to discuss, but you needed to go to a mailing list. You needed to involve to start contributing. It was harder because how did you get a subversion patch file created? I don't remember how I did it. I know that nowadays I don't want to do it, because now and GitHub, and in fact GitHub changed the way, because now contributing is just fork, submit a pull request. So yes, it changed from no knowledge, from a knowledge that was hard to get, and a discussion that was not so easy to engage, to a process that is 5 seconds away, and you start to engage the discussion. Eventually, it had bad aspects also, because it's so easy to contribute and not take time to discuss after the first submit, that nowadays there are many 10 seconds contribution that could get to something interesting. But if people just submit 2 words and are not interested into continuing the discussion on why in fact this idea is nice, but it should be improved before being merged, you have half contribution now. It is too easy, in fact. you may have half contribution if it's not just typos. Yeah, which are good contribution, whatever the time you take on it.
Yeah, I want to dive into that a little bit because there's two parts of that that are important. One is really easy. So there's the expression flyby contributor, as someone who does just one PR and then you never see them again, even if you ask questions on follow up to clarify and they're just gone. They're a ghost in the wind. And so you don't know as a maintainer if you should be putting your working hours towards trying to solve that problem, if it's even going to be used again, right? But I think something that's really worth diving into from both of your perspectives is, what does it mean to be a good contributor? What does a good PR look like, especially if it's an initial one? What do you want to be seeing and how do you want people to communicate with you if you're trying to solve a problem?
Well, for me, that's it's easy to say, but it's probably as often what you see, right? Which is, as kind of Hervé mentioned, right, you kind of need to be involved in a conversation. There needs to ideally be some conversation for most of these contributions. Again, GitHub makes this a lot easier than it has been. Create an issue first before you create a PR. Allow you to distill your idea into actual words, because when you do that, often, forces you to think about what you're saying, and it allows that conversation to take place. And to your point, Sal, does that feature request, if you like, should it even live in the project you're asking it to live in, right? That's the answer is not always yes, or not always immediately yes, perhaps. So I think that the golden rule there is you need to be prepared to communicate, and you should engage in the communication. It's just sending something with no comments or for reason or rhyme. Most maintainers aren't going to spend any time on that, or they're not going to see the value. What is it trying to achieve? Why should we consider taking that? I'm happy to say on a couple of the projects I've been working on, there have been some really great people getting involved. Recent, and to the point Hervé raised, yes, some people did raise a PR and some stuff, and we went back with questions, and they came back to us. And more importantly, after we merged it and we released the change, they came back and clarified it was solving their problem, which is even better, right? So communication is the headline.
Precisely. Yeah, and so as maintainers of code, people need to understand, because you can start, there's two issues that I've seen that bother me a lot. There's the like flyby, make a request, never get back to you. There's the other side of that entirely that I've also experienced in projects that I maintain, where someone gives me a PR of literally thousands of code. It's an entirely new feature. They never asked me. And my lines of code are pretty much an exponential indicator of the amount of time that I have to spend maintaining something, right? So if you're handing it off to me, are you expecting me to maintain it? So Hervé, how do you think you've seen that sort of situation change and evolve, because we've got a much larger global community of contributors now that are beginning to participate?
In fact, it's funny. Sometimes people want to achieve something. While they are at it, they fix something else, then fix something else, and at the end, you get one contribution that tries to fix many things at the same time. And in fact, the first thing will be nowadays it is easy. Just do one pull request per simple things.
I think we may have lost Hervé for a second, but I think he'll jump back in.
Lost France, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think he might have gotten overwhelmed by a merge request that he can't integrate. But when he comes online, I think that's a really good point. If we're sitting in enterprise, then there typically are standard practices to the way that you want to go about merging and integrating code as you continue on a roadmap. That kind of centralized process doesn't really exist for some open source projects, but how are we seeing that improve as maintainers, particularly, I think, are getting better at communicating what the right roadmap is and exactly where you can be contributing?
Well, again, like, we keep talking about GitHub. There's so many features now on GitHub that allow maintainers to fairly easily, manage work in flight, try to explain to the community when things might happen. There are also much better documented at least. I mean, they've existed for a long while, but they're certainly more well known. Semantic versioning, Angular commit messages, all these things are now kind of very much front and center normality. And having that kind of standardized approach helps, massively. What's a breaking change? It's easy to talk about it, but now we kind of know in the world, if it's a breaking change, we're going to bump that first version number, right? And those sorts of things help.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think, we're continuing this discussion of really understanding how we can take some of the best practices that we developed from enterprise and move them into the way that we do open source, particularly in the way that we do strategic merging and integration. And I think one of the learning lessons that I'm hearing out of this is do it incrementally, right? And this is really the way that you can be an excellent contributor. I want to be having a two-way conversation as to whether or not it's worth your time and my time to build something out. And if we do that incrementally, it ensures that everyone stays on the same roadmap and no one loses valuable time or valuable effort. And I think that's really one of the major failings that I'm currently seeing in the way that we're doing this really globalized version of open source, where so many people are getting involved and engaged. Some people are incredible developers that have come out of different areas and are just starting to contribute to open source. They have a lot to give, but they need to treat it the same as they would treat any other organization, right? There's a lot of considerations in the way that you want to manage that. And I do really want to emphasize, right? You two are human beings. On the other side of all these pull requests are human beings with rate limitations on what they can put towards these projects. And when you consider that, right? When you consider it's just a person on the other side, it can change the way that you approach it. I mean, GitHub makes it seem a little bit more mechanical, but it really is all driven by people, right? So what do you wish that people would be able to walk away from this conversation understanding if maybe today they want to consider making their first contribution? How would you encourage them to go out and find a project that they're interested in? And how would you encourage them to make their very, very first point of contact?
Do it with passion on something you are interested in. Do it incrementally, something small today to have a first contact, something bigger tomorrow with 2 lines of code tomorrow, 10 lines of code in 1 week, and the contribution you were dreaming of in 1 month. And that's why you need to love where you contribute, because it will become really interesting in 1 month. Mm-hmm. But you need the first steps to engage, to start to create a relationship, something, and time is needed.
I agree with Hervé. I think that's always the best sort of contribution, or the best sorts of contributions, because there's a relationship there. There's some longevity to that relationship, hopefully, right? Which always drives the best commits, I think, or the best, the best featured requests and things. But I suppose we shouldn't be blinkered to the fact that there is a market, a need for kind of the flyby, type of contributions, and it might be you're doing something at work and something is just a bit of a pain today, and actually, open that issue, explain the challenge you're having using that tool, project, whatever it is, and then be prepared to engage in that discussion. You might not even have to write any code. The project may just go, you know what, great idea, let's do it. But you have the idea, right? And that's the bit we all have to come together on. So that's another good thing, I think. And I've definitely seen loads of good examples of that in some of the projects I work on.
Yeah, I mean, it really is the same feeling as the kind of person who walks down the street and sees like a piece of trash on the ground and really feels like they just want to pick it up and put it away, right? It's the people who are going around and proactively making sure that the world that they exist in is a little bit better for the next person that has to go in and deal with that. And if you understand that motivation, right, you don't have to make code contributions, but you do have to contribute. And if we can all do that, open source is going to thrive. Are there any final thoughts that you all have as we wrap this up?
Don't be scared. Like, there are just people at the end of these
Yes.
these systems, and often there aren't stupid questions, right? I always say this to people: there aren't stupid questions, just unanswered questions, right? So the worst that can happen of you raising a question or an issue on a project is you get politely advised that it's probably not something for this project, in which case you at least know that. Okay, best case, you just put a great idea into it and it might happen, with or without your direct coding input. So don't be afraid. All right, don't be scared. Get involved.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Hervé, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. And for everyone who has been listening in on this call or to the recording afterwards, we very much look forward to seeing you in our issues and our PRs very soon. Thank you all so much.
Cheers.
Thank you.